Charlie began openly questioning Israel in a way that was very alarming to Israel. And in the wake of the emotions left by your death or your murder, he wasn't just warning about the dangers of a war with Iran. He was warning about how they were pushing for regime change in Iran in order to benefit Israel.
Glenn Greenwald revealed that shortly prior to Charlie Kirk's assassination, he was beginning to turn against Israel and asking questions about the U.S.-Israeli relationship. Glenn also gets into how Netanyahu has tried to take this and propagandize it as a tool to try to recapture the American right when many people are peeling off unwavering support of Israel. This also serves as the basis for a theory that Charlie Kirk was assassinated by Israel, so I think that's worth discussing at the very least, whether or not you agree with that. So let's get into this. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
It's been a frequent theme in my reporting over the years, on this show over the last several years, that emotions are often easily exploited when they're at their peak moment, their peak level of intensity. And then they're misdirected opportunistically for all sorts of ends that people end up regretting. Talked a lot about how that happened when Russia invaded Ukraine and the propaganda was so intense, showing grandmothers in Ukraine who were dying, and people got very emotionally invested in Ukraine. And 4 years later now, we're still funding it, we're still arming it. And a lot of people have come to regret that. Same thing happened after 9/11, of course, where people ended up cheering for all sorts of things they've come to regret. Last night was September 11th. 24th anniversary of that attack, where we examined many of those lessons that I would hope people have learned about guarding against exploitation of their strong emotions after an event of a kind like that attack, or the COVID attack, or the COVID pandemic, or the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But one person who understands very well how to exploit the opinions and emotions of American citizens, that's not just my assessment. He's boasted openly about how adept he is at manipulating American public opinion for the interest of Israel, is Benjamin Netanyahu. He really is talented at being able to deceitfully exploit emotions and attach himself to them and then redirect them towards Israel's interests. And I've never seen him do it quite as brazenly as he's been doing this week, ever since.
Yeah, this is exactly true. He does boast about it. He was on a hidden camera footage where he actually says, you know, in a living room of someone to turn your camera off, and then he boasts about having the Americans wrapped around his finger. Essentially, he said they're easily led, essentially. You know, I hate to say it seems right, by the way, and that's something that the U.S. should resist, but Glenn's right.
It's the moment that Charlie Kirk was shot. Benjamin Netanyahu was all over Twitter attaching himself to Charlie Kirk, depicting Charlie Kirk as some sort of ultimate and supreme supporter of and loyalist to the state of Israel. And therefore, if you're having a lot of emotions about Charlie Kirk, you're sad that he was so brutally assassinated. If you're angry about it, if you are remembering all the things to admire about Charlie Kirk, he's trying to take those emotions and get you to believe that the only adequate vehicle for expression of them is to believe everything that Charlie Kirk believed, and that includes, according to Netanyahu, that he was one of the greatest and most stalwart defenders of the American financing of Israel and arming of Israel and support for Israel and subservience to Israel. And in fact, nothing could be further from the truth.
Wow, well, interesting. I think in the past, you know, Kirk is on record for having very unwavering support for Israel, but, you know, I've been a little bit critical about some of these narratives that he was totally turning away from Israel recently, but I can't wait to see Glenn's evidence. Maybe I'll shift my view on that, but I do want to back Glenn's opinion that, you know, during, you know, things like this is a high-profile political assassination. Tensions run high on both sides. I've seen toxic responses on both sides. One saying that, you know, he deserved it, and then on another side saying this calls for civil war, turning the power of the state against the entirety of the left, not holding individuals accountable. You know, both preposterous things. So I hope that is reined in a little bit for the sake of sanity, and that we actually find answers about this assassination. But I do want to hear from Glenn here.
You can for sure find a lot of statements from Charlie Kirk, particularly over the many years, where he absolutely expressed support for Israel. He talked about how his Christianity made him view Jerusalem in particular as a very holy place, and what he called Judea and Samaria. He was definitely pro-Israel in a lot of statements. There's no doubt about that. But as the American right began to become more about America first, as they became more non-interventionist, as young people in particular began to turn against Israel and the war in Gaza, as all polling showed they did, Charlie, being part of this youth movement, being part of the younger generation, began openly questioning Israel in a way that was very alarming to Israel, especially after Tucker Carlson had been doing that, after Candace Owens had been doing that, after a large part of the American right, especially younger people, were starting to question the U.S.-Israel relationship. This has been a major, major source of alarm. This is
Yeah, that is true. Israel is sweating this, and they know that they only have probably a few years to accomplish the greater Israel project of expanding their borders, expanding the West Bank settlements, occupying Gaza, conducting and finishing this genocide, because younger conservatives aren't starting to buy this in the same way that older boomer conservatives are, generally speaking. I know there's exceptions, but that is true. The tides are shifting away from this pro-Israel mentality, and that is seen as a major threat to Israel. No matter what you think about Charlie, the reasons for his death, etc., that is absolutely true, and it's hard to refute.
Extremely important opportunity for Israel to exploit the death of Charlie Kirk, to exploit his memory, to exploit the positive emotions toward him, the admiration for him being expressed on the right, to basically construct him as a martyr of Israel, so that any admiration you have for Charlie Kirk means that you are revering somebody who was one of Israel's closest friends. And that is simply false. You'll be surprised to learn that Benjamin Netanyahu is not telling the truth about that. And there's a lot of other Israel supporters who are engaged in the same mission. Earlier today, Tucker Carlson, who is one of the main reasons that a lot of the American right has started to turn against Israel.
Oh, yes, he is. And Candace Owens, those two in particular, are two reasons why a lot of people on the right have cited, it's all right to go against Israel. Look at two of the top influencers, maybe the top two conservative influencers on the planet. And Charlie was in that orbit. He was in the orbit of those two in terms of his influence, too.
Was on with Megyn Kelly. And they were talking about Charlie Kirk and specifically this kind of anti-interventionist, especially anti-war when it came to the Middle East, and questioning of Israel that he had been exhibiting over the past, at least since the beginning of the Trump administration, in a way that has been deeply worrying to Israel. Here's what they had to say.
He was one of the only people, truly one of the only people to go to the president whom he loved. He loved Donald Trump, personally as well. And I think the president really loved him in a real way. But he was one of the only people to go to the Oval Office and say, sir, I totally understand and think Iran's really bad, but a war with Iran is not, is something that could really hurt our country. Boy, that was an unpopular position. He didn't need to express it. Oh, of course. And he did it again. He didn't have some weird agenda. He wasn't mad at anybody. He was for his country, and he was for doing the right and wise and difficult thing. And he said that. He went to the Oval Office to say that. He took massive abuse from his own donors, which is also something that you don't see people. And
yeah, no, this is true. This is true by accounts of that time, but I think Tucker's being a little bit I wouldn't say charitable. That's the wrong word. Tucker's not taking enough credit, too. He apparently called Trump and warned him against bombing Iran, too, and also Bannon did. I'm not trying to take anything away from this narrative because it is significant that, Charlie Kirk defied a lot of his donors that are strict neocons that did want regime change in Iran to tell the president, don't do this. It's not America first. It's not worth it. So just some context, but that is true.
He loved his donors. It wasn't a hostile thing, but they had a different view. A lot of them, not all, but a lot. And they expressed it to him in a very intense way. I know because he showed me. And he said, look, I understand your perspective. This is my perspective, and we're going to do what we think is the right thing, the wise thing.
In that way, too, he was the voice of young people. There are no young people in the country anymore supporting this war and wanting Israel to continue its bombing campaign. That's just the truth. Look at the polls. And he was in touch with them. And even where his own opinion may have differed from their opinion, he felt like he owed it to them to bring their message to the sitting president of the United States. That's what's been snuffed out.
Yeah. Younger conservatives are moving away from this. Every poll shows it. The Turning Point USA event he had with Josh Hammer and Dave Smith debating on Israel And the response to that shows it. The response to Tucker Carlson speaking there and saying, hey, it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, by the way. Oh, and by the way, Epstein was probably working for Israel. Let's not beat around the bush. Tucker Carlson said that and got rousing applause. If that tells you where younger conservatism is going compared to older, you know, I don't know what does if that doesn't.
I think that's actually an extremely important point that Megan made there, which is that, okay, it's one thing for Tucker Carlson to really become vocal against the wars that Israel is fighting. And
let's be real, it's not a war in Gaza. That's a genocide. But, you know, that is the safe way to say it if you're just moving away from that on the right instead of, you know, being totally red-pilled against Israel. That's how they talk about it. You know,
they are worried about that. It's also very worrying when someone like Candace Owens does it, who's roughly Charlie Kirk's age. Even though she doesn't quite have the influence among, say, young people, I think she has more of a broader influence in the conservative movement. But it's very worrying when she does it. But Charlie Kirk, you know, I said this about Nick Fuentes, about the enormous amount of influence that he has assembled when it comes to young people on the American right. Charlie Kirk is one of the people you could, you know, say might have more influence, have had more influence among especially young conservatives than anybody else, more than Ben Shapiro, more than Tucker.
Yeah, I buy that, actually. I think overall Tucker and Candace probably do have slightly more influence over people in general, over moving the needle in general. But no question, Charlie Kirk had the most among young people. His organization was nothing to scoff at. I think they had something like 3,500 chapters with tons of donors, with big money donors, a huge organization backed by him and his charisma. You know, whatever you think about him and his ideas, I totally disagreed with him on Gaza and, you know, things that he said to justify Israel's behavior there. But at the same time, these things can't be denied about Charlie.
More than Nick Fuentes. And he was very entrenched right at the peak of Republican power, of conservative power. I mean, he was close friends with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, and, you know, that's the president, vice president, and everybody down the line. So for Charlie Kirk to start representing this massive change in American attitudes toward Israel, given that Charlie Kirk had always been a supporter of Israel, given that many of his donors are extremely pro-Israel, as Tucker said, in a way that could have been the most alarming danger for Israel possible.
Totally agree with that. You know, there's nothing to disagree with that, whatever you think are the explanations or motivations behind his death, whether you think Israel was involved in his death, another intelligence agency was or not, you know, whether this guy they took down was part of a conspiracy more than him. You know, we don't have all the information in front of this yet, but what Glenn says is right. You know, he was a threat to move the needle on the conservative wing of the country, of the political zeitgeist in general. No one could do that more maybe than Charlie Kirk among young people. Now, he wasn't the only one. There was other prominent people in his organization. You had people beyond the people we're talking about, the Benny Johnsons and Jack Posobics of the world too, but he was a major figure on the right. And that's what's, I've had to talk to a lot of like liberal establishment types that actually didn't know much about Charlie. He really is, you know, one of the top 3 guys, or was, in the country, you know, maybe in the world in terms of conservative influence.
The thing they were most worried about, that he was clearly moving away from that pro-Israel stance in a way that might have been almost a tipping point in right-wing politics. Just to give you one example of what Tucker was talking about, in April of 2025, Tucker Carlson had basically said he was in touch with people very closely at the White House and knew that there was a serious movement to have the United States abandon its diplomacy that Trump kept promising was going to resolve the problem with Iran, and instead to bomb Iran, to go to war for Israel and with Israel in Iran. And Tucker came out with a big dramatic statement about how dangerous this is, and right around the same time, might have even been the same
heroic statement, by the way, by Tucker.
Day before, day after, it was really right around the same time. This is what Charlie Kirk posted to X. Quote, "It's going unnoticed because so much other news is happening, but the war drums are beating again in D.C. The warmongers worry this is their last chance to get the white whale they've been chasing for 30 years, namely an all-out regime change war against Iran. So he's denouncing and warning about the so-called warmongers, who he says have as their primary goal an all-out regime change against Iran. Who is he talking about there? Neocons, Israel supporters, Israelis. Obviously, that's who had as their white whale an all-out regime change war against Iran. And he was denouncing them and warning of their dangers. This is what he said, quote, "A new Middle East war would be a catastrophic mistake. Our military stockpiles are depleted from 3 years of backing Ukraine. Our effort to restore manufacturing has only just begun and will take years to bear fruit. War could worsen our already immense deficit and national debt. Iran is larger than Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan combined. A war would not be easy and could easily become a calamity."
One of the most courageous and heroic things he could have possibly written, to, at a time where tensions were high and regime change was on the table because Donald Trump Truth Socialed about it. This is about the best thing I've ever seen Charlie Kirk write. And lots of anti-war dissidents, realized this at the time, recognized it as such. This was a major deal. This does buck the neocons like Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin, who were clamoring for all-out regime change. Finish the job. It's a job left undone. And every word of this is right, is it not? This was driven by warmongers. It would have been disastrous. It would have been a huge catastrophe that America could not afford after these senseless foreign wars. Such a heroic statement. Again, regardless of his fallibility on other topics, which I do think exists. It's hard to say that about a dead guy that was brutally murdered in front of his family's eyes, but we had to be truthful about that on this show and what we think about, the panoply of his views on many topics.
Thanks to President Trump's restraint during the first term, America has a golden opportunity to pull away from the Middle East quagmires for good. We shouldn't throw that opportunity away so that some DC has-beens can feel tough by sending young Americans to die yet again. I mean, it's hard to overstate what a significant statement that was. He wasn't just warning about the dangers of a war with Iran. He was denouncing a very specific group of people in Washington, in the Republican Party and the conservative movement, calling them has-beens and warmongers, and warning about how they were pushing for regime change in Iran in order to benefit Israel.
Couldn't agree more. And too many of those people are still sitting around Trump's desk, like Marco Rubio and Keith Kellogg and Mike Huckabee. Mike Waltz was just a few months ago. John Ratcliffe, a total pro-Mossad shill. Completely so. And that influence is powerful still in this supposed America First administration. And to say that, it did take courage from Charlie. I have to admit that this is compelling, when it comes to the idea that he was turning away from Israel. Of course, not in all of his statements, but in this, he certainly was.
Charlie Kirk went on Megyn Kelly, and I'm showing you this because I want you to see Charlie Kirk speaking for himself rather than Netanyahu doing it for him.
Good.
And Megyn Kelly, in particular, has been a stalwart supporter of Israel. Like pretty much the standard conventional view on the right that Israel is our ally, we should support them, they're in a sea of radical Islam, which is also our enemy. And she's a very fervent supporter of Israel. She has been her whole career in a way that aligns with Fox and fits right in there. And that's Megyn Kelly has some pretty standard views of foreign policy, very much aligned with like the Bush-Cheney era where she emerged from. But she's also been questioning a lot of those. I've been on our show a couple times debating with her, and she's very open to those debates and has started questioning things that she would never have questioned even a year ago.
And apparently she got death threats just for hosting Marjorie Taylor Greene on her show, by the way, to talk about the atrocities in Gaza, to talk about the absurd nature of the Israel First mentality in Washington. She hasn't seemed to change her opinion so much on Israel, but it's just who she's platforming that's seen as a threat to the Zionists. I believe that totally. You saw a lot of people denouncing her just for having Marjorie Taylor Greene on her show.
And Charlie Kirk was doing the same. And as a result of their even slight deviation from the pro-Israel line, Charlie much more than Megyn, but both of them, they started getting accused of anti-Semitism in the Israeli media. Charlie was being attacked as some sort of like in following the footsteps of Tucker Carlson. And they were both very angry about it. And Charlie Kirk went on Megyn Kelly, and they both kind of aired out their anger and sort of said, like, look, back off, or, you know, you're going to drive people away from you even more.
I feel the connection to Israel, but at the same time, simultaneously, when the hostile reaction is that now Megyn and Charlie are enemies,
right?
Boy, I'll tell you, like you're not gonna, I wouldn't say lose, but you will weaken and just basically deflate two of your strongest advocates if that continues.
Right, and to me, I laugh because it's like, I've been bullied by the best of them, the best. And it didn't work, and it's not going to work with them. The more you try to tell me I can't criticize Israel, the more likely I am to do it.
Well, I hope you do, and I couldn't agree with this response to these questions more than these two, who I don't agree with on foreign policy a lot of the time. This is the natural result of saying that you can't critique Israel, or that critiquing Israel means you're an automatic anti-Semite. They're right about that.
Focus on exactly what you're doing, right? Like what are you doing that you're so defensive? You don't own me. I don't take $1 of money from any Jewish affiliated group. That's never been what my show's model. I take, you know, Cozy Earth is my sponsor. People like Genucel. Those are the people I take. And I probably would feel reluctant to criticize Genucel, which is a great product, so I probably wouldn't do it anyway. My point is simply, I have my honest opinions, which is why I had credibility for the 2 years I've been defending them, right? And I still have that credibility, and I don't need lectures from my friends who are more pro-Israel than I am, or who are just American Jewish people who are concerned about what's happening. I don't need lectures on my coverage, okay? I'll call it like I see it. And you have no right to come on this show and demand a debate with me because I've said something you disagree with. It's my show, and I'll decide the coverage we do.
Okay, I mean, that was a month ago. I mean, does that sound like Charlie Kirk is the most stalwart defender of Israel? Here's a little bit more.
No, it doesn't. And actually, you know, it indicates that he had a problem with the pushback that some were getting over even asking questions about Israel. You know, the mantra that, oh, just asking questions, that must mean you're an anti-Semite. Just those absurdities that Ted Cruz used against Tucker Carlson. But I will note that at times around this same time frame, just over a month ago, Charlie Kirk also was repeating a lot of the Israeli propaganda when there was a lot of assertions about the starvations in Gaza, the GHF, you know, the intentions to starve out the populace, which weren't helped, by the way, by comments from Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and, you know, people in the Israeli war cabinet. And here's an example. This was Charlie Kirk on July 28th. He had a video, you know, just straight up Israeli propaganda that Israel's not starving Gaza. He cites, you know, the fact that they're just defending themselves. A lot of the pro-Israeli propaganda. So I just want to give an even-handed take here in addition to Glenn's. I'm not saying what he's presenting isn't significant, because it is, actually. It's a lot different than, you know, the Ben Shapiro Zionism. But this is also showing another side of this around the same time frame. He was still very pro-Israel, talking about, you know, Israel has the right to defend itself in various interviews, and talking about how it wasn't starving children, and we can't trust what comes out of TikTok on this. So just something that's food for thought. Let's continue.
Or from what they talked about on that day.
I got text about you, Megyn, saying, why is Megyn like doing the bidding of Hamas? I was like, what are you talking about? Megyn's the best. Like, what? Like, she's amazing. And I said, why are you texting me about Megyn? And I, at that point, and so this is what they don't understand. You and I, Megyn, and Tucker is in the same category, and they've tried to go after Tucker.
Yeah.
Is that and the more you attack our moral character, the more we're going to double down in a direction, because 100%. Screw you, I don't do it that way, okay?
Right.
Like when Tell me I'm wrong. Cool. Tell me if I got my facts wrong. By the way, on the Epstein thing, Naftali Bennett says he wasn't an Epstein agent. We have to be pursuers of truth. They've denied it. Fine. Let's keep digging. Okay, fine. But
By the way, that's another thing. Charlie Kirk was speaking openly about the possibility that Epstein was tied to the Mossad, to Israeli intelligence. He wasn't just like wondering about it as one of many instances. He was clearly suggesting that the evidence he's seen is enough to make him strongly suspicious.
Well, in addition to that, though, Glenn, I did see another clip where he is actually wondering about it. Like, he lists several possibilities of Epstein and who he was working for. And he lists, you know, possibly a Mossad agent or an American intelligence asset in the same sentence. There's another clip going around like that. So, you know, he did bring it up, and that is, you know, substantial information, but he did entertain other possibilities too, including an American asset. He didn't just say that I've ever seen, you know, yeah, Jeffrey Epstein was working for Mossad. That's a lot different than entertaining the possibility. But again, this is substantial. This is not the same as people like Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro that have constantly said nothing to see here.
That Epstein was tied to the Israeli government and to the Mossad. Is this the person that sounds to you like is this Ben Shapiro? Is this Barry Weiss? Like some sort of agent or asset of the Israeli government doing its bidding? There might have been a point where Charlie Kirk was that. But that isn't who he's been over the last several months.
Okay, so look, I mostly agree with Glenn Greenwald here, though not completely, because in addition to what I just presented regarding to him talking about the starvation in Gaza and how that's just propaganda, I watched this entire interview between these two last night to go over it again, go down the rabbit hole, and dig into this more. And actually, this interview was also filled by a lot of segments where the two do regurgitate a lot of the Israeli propaganda that we hear. And especially striking to me was when the two discussed the images coming out of Gaza. At one point, Megyn Kelly talks about how, you know, this is just Hamas's propaganda. All the images coming out of Gaza, we can't trust them. They'll want nothing more to annihilate the Jews, nothing more than to annihilate the Israelis. And Charlie Kirk agrees with that profusely. He's like, yeah, I absolutely agree. So there are segments in this clip where they do double down on the propaganda too. I'm just relaying this in the terms of context, saying that, yeah, he seems to have been drifting away from the Israel first mentality to some extent, but it was counterbalanced by some other things in which they did repeat that kind of propaganda. And, you know, that's only telling. That is only telling of people that are maybe moving away. They're not going to, you know, cling to all the propaganda, but some of it. But I do think it's worthy in consideration of this.
And don't listen to Netanyahu about Charlie Kirk. Listen to what he says himself.
The thing that I think is being lost is, like, on some part of the population, you can scold them into silence, right? Mm-hmm. But if I have any deviation of a purity test, any deviation whatsoever, such as hosting a focus group, right, Megan, with a bunch of our students that went viral, having Dave Smith or Tucker at my event, it is all of a sudden, oh, Charlie is he's no longer with us and all that. So wait a second, what do you mean? What does with us mean exactly?
That's the other thing. The Turning Point annual conference has become an extremely important stage for conservatism, especially for young conservatives. And not only did Charlie invite Tucker to give a keynote speech, which he did and talked about the wars in Israel and the like, and did it aggressively. I mean, he gave Tucker a major platform at Turning Point USA, despite the fact that Tucker has been under massive attack by Israel and its supporters in the United States for supposedly being an anti-Semite, for not supporting Israel. He also had a debate on Israel where he invited Dave Smith, the very harsh critic of Israel, who's a libertarian, and invited some neocon who defended Israel.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. This was significant, and it got a lot of applause. The anti-Israel first mentality, that standpoint got a lot of boom and applause, both from Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith, and that is significant. A lot of the donors had issues with that. This is true.
So there was a lot of questioning of Israel at the Turning Point conference. And that enraged Turning Point's founders and donors, rather, who are extremely pro-Israel, and a lot of people in the conservative movement, that's part of what they're reacting to.
Exactly, right? Mm-hmm. I'm an American, okay? Like, I represent this country, and I don't even understand that paradigm. But, Megan, I think you would agree with this. I want to make sure we really zero in on this. Personality types like you, myself, and Tucker, the more that you guys privately and publicly call our character into question, which is not isolated, right? Megan, it would be one thing if it was right. One text or two text. It is dozens of texts.
Yes.
Then we start to say, hold the boat here. And to be fair, some of my really good Jewish friends are like, that's not all of us, it's all, but these are leaders too, though, right? These are stakeholders, right?
So there you have it. And I find it utterly obnoxious. Like I said, imagine that you die and you've devoted your life to various political causes. And in the wake of the emotions left by your death or your murder, in swoops Benjamin Netanyahu to try and recapture the American right as his little pet, to say, oh, you love Charlie Kirk? Well, then do as Charlie did. He was a unyielding and passionate supporter of Israel and of the American-Israel relationship. It's despicable, and I think it's so transparent that it's unlikely to work on anybody other than people who are already ready to believe whatever Netanyahu says and believes in the pro-Israel fanaticism.
Yeah, well said, Glenn. No question that Netanyahu is out there talking about this, propagandizing this. You know, there was an IDF soldier that actually signed a bomb. That was the kind of bomb that's used to kill women and children and innocents in Gaza, by the way, that said, we love you, Charlie, by the way. So, yeah, the propaganda runs deep on this one. And there's no doubt that Charlie Kirk was questioning Israel to a greater extent than he had before. In this last month, I think. I did show some of that evidence for just over a month ago where he was, repeating a lot of the propaganda, but he was asking questions. And in that interview with Megyn Kelly, this was not something that you would have gotten away with if you were, in the total neocon camp, in the Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin camp, Lindsey Graham camp of this, certainly so. Megyn Kelly just entertaining this and having on Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, despite repeating, a lot of the Israeli propaganda on her shows, which I pointed to, which are parts of these shows outside of these isolated clips. And by the way, I'm not blaming Glenn for that. Glenn found a lot of substantial clips here. I think if you watch the entire interview, it paints a larger picture that shows that these were not pure foes of Israel. They might have been moving away, Charlie more so too, but that's not the full picture. But look, so I think this is worth discussing. This is worth discussing in terms of his assassination. At the very least, Netanyahu is trying to use this and make Charlie Kirk into a Israel-first martyr to pull the American right back onto the side of Israel to try to salvage some of his losses, because there have been some. People are noticing. People are noticing more and more when you have people like Thomas Massie and Marjorie Taylor Greene noticing it, and not only noticing it, but being some of the most based on that issue, with Marjorie Taylor Greene, as far as I know, being the first Republican to literally call what Israel's doing in Gaza a genocide. I think rightly so, by the way. At the same time, I think there are a lot of clips floating out there that are more nothing burgers when it comes to this narrative too. And I want to, offset what I've already said by presenting, two of those. One of those is on the Patrick Bet David show. A lot of people have pointed to this clip in my comments. They said, look at what he said in Patrick Bet David. He didn't buy that Israel had no foreknowledge of the October 7th attack. And that's what shows his recent turn against Israel. And I looked into this. This interview between Charlie Kirk and PDB happened literally 5 days after October 7th. It was on October 12th, 2023 on the PDB podcast. And on that podcast, Charlie Kirk does express skepticism that they didn't know about the attack in advance. But it's helpful to know that was almost 2 years ago now. So that doesn't really indicate a recent turn against Israel. If anything, that kind of refutes the notion that his turn was recent. If you're saying that that's when he was turning against Israel, well, that was 2 years ago, by the way, right after October 7th. And then a few days after that, Charlie Kirk had a very, very strong statement where he said he defends Israel's right to defend itself. I will show you right here. Let's see. He was expressing support for Israel days after that. I think I might have lost it here. I think I might have lost it there, but he was expressing strong support for Israel to defend itself like a few days after he was on the PDB show, by the way, expressing basically the most unwavering possible support for Israel. So that's something that I just don't think you can ignore about this. If you're going to claim that that indicates his recent term, well, that was 2 years ago anyways. And by the way, that story had been printed by the Times of Israel, which is much more pro-Likud and pro-Netanyahu than Haaretz. The story that Israel, where it was attacked and Netanyahu's support for Hamas bit them in the back. And, there was lots of other stories in the Israeli press about foreknowledge, about the fact that Egypt had warned Israel 3 days in advance. And things like that. And there was even stories that Mossad knew about attack of this type a year in advance. So, back then he had very unwavering support for Israel, even after those statements. The other clip I want to talk about is, I think, the biggest nothing burger. And this is the clip people are circulating. The Ben Shapiro eyebrow raise, video, where they're presenting this video showing Charlie Kirk asking Ben Shapiro, and I'm paraphrasing this, you can watch this video, but he says something along the lines of, oh, hey, do you think the media is, telling the truth completely about everything that comes out of Israel too? Teeing that over to Ben Shapiro, who specializes in pro-Zionist apologetics, and then Ben Shapiro's eyebrows raised. And it's the eyebrows raised that it's making people say, oh, Israel definitely killed Charlie Kirk. And I just think it's such a giant leap to conclusions. If you watch Ben Shapiro's show, and I don't recommend it, it's cruel and unusual punishment, especially if you're not a neocon. But if you do, with just about every guest, he does raise his eyebrows, during inquisitive conversation, people asking questions, people making points. That's not that atypical. And the question doesn't express any criticism toward Israel by Charlie. So that one, I think, is kind of a nothing burger. That's not to say all this is a nothing burger. I think there's some substantial things here. But if you're going to just connect this innately to the allegation that, oh, Israel definitely killed Charlie Kirk, I think it's a little bit irresponsible if you don't try to explain and connect this shooter they captured, if you think this is the shooter, to Mossad. If you connect him in any way, his style of murder, the fact that he wore a black suit on a gray roof that doesn't exactly blend him into his surroundings, the fact that he jumped off a roof, risked breaking his leg, the fact that he left the gun behind. I don't think a lot of these things that we know about the shooter, if again you believe that's the shooter, I have no reason to doubt that guy wasn't involved, by the way, that if you don't connect him to Israel, because I'm seeing no one try to make a real effort to connect him to Mossad or to Israel in this narrative that Israel did it. And again, I'm not saying don't talk about it. I'm not saying don't analyze it. I'm as big of a fan of red-pilled conspiracy theories as anyone out there. But just please bring substance to the table and try to explain that along with your narrative. And that's not to say you can't poke holes in the official narrative. We should be doing that. But if you're so sure right now that Israel did it, it would be irresponsible not to talk about the Israeli connection to this shooter. And I hope more information comes out, maybe to do that. My mind's open. I'm open to more information. The more I've delved into this, the more I've found things that really turn me away from this narrative, and then some things that make me entertain it to some extent. My mind's still open. So if you want to call me a pro-Israeli shill, despite my standpoint on this, and despite my 200 or so videos slamming Israel, the genocide and the wars and the stupidity and toxicity of the Israel First narrative, go for it. But that's where I am right now. Great video, though. Glenn covered this fantastically. I do want to hear from you, though. Let me know down below, what do you think about this theory? Was Charlie Kirk really turning away from Israel? You know, who is responsible for his death? What are the motivations? What are the connections between the shooter and Israel, if you have them? If you're so sure about this narrative, I want to hear from you on that especially. Let me know down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Glenn Greenwald. Great journalism here. Glenn is one of the best. And please consider becoming a YouTube supporter. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel. I'll tip my hat to you for that. And also give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube, if you do that. Until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.